right, thank you for staying here till 4:30. It's been a long day, I know. We're going to make this panel interesting, okay? I promise you guys. We're not going to talk about a whole bunch of super deep tech stuff that you won't even understand. We're going to talk about real-life adoptions, something that we can all understand. Believe me, if I can understand it, you can too. I'm Caroline. I'm with SV Insight. I am a tech reporter. And why don't we go down the line, and you guys can take turns and introduce yourself in simple words.
All right, I'm Saba. I'm the CEO of Ledger Atlas. We are establishing special economic zones in emerging markets to formalize best practices for blockchain companies.
I'm Roy. I'm the founder of Ultra Salescloud. Basically, we're trying to build the next AI intelligent digital market platform with blockchain.
Hey everyone, my name's Andrew. I'm a partner at a fund called Fission with offices based in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. Also advisor to a number of projects in the space, Orgo, Metadium, QuarkChain.
I'm Wes Levitt, head of strategy for Theta Labs, and we're creating essentially decentralized video delivery, so akin to Akamai or other content delivery networks, but in a decentralized fashion.
All right, so let's go a little bit more in depth. So, Jack, why don't I start with you? Tell us a little bit more about Ledger Ellis. What is it? What's the problem that you're trying to solve?
So, when we look at the regulatory landscape right now, we're seeing that there's kind of two categories, and they both have the same problem. There's areas where you can operate at will, do what you want, no taxes really, and then there's jurisdictions like the United States where you have high taxes, and the SEC is definitely coming down. The issue that both of those areas have is that there's regulatory uncertainty. So blockchain companies don't know if the way that they're operating is the way that they were going to be able to operate in the future, or if the way that they're raising funds today is not going to be illegal in the future as well. So what we're trying to do is work with the blockchain community to formalize the best practices for the blockchain community and create regulatory certainty in an environment that constantly pushes legislation to promote innovation.
Best practices, what does that mean? Can you explain a bit more?
So right now, initial coin offerings are happening in a very tumultuous manner.
Right.
They're all over the world. There's no standardization to it, and there's no formalization to it. So there are certain practices such as doing a pre-sale, building a product, bringing it to market, communicating with the holders of the token and the stakeholders of the network, and then doing another token sale and then eventually another one. But right now we're seeing a lot of companies run right through them. So that's an example of where we want to turn to the blockchain community and say, what are the lessons learned from doing the pre-sale, the private pre-sale, the public pre-sale, and the ICO within 3 months? And what were the challenges of that? How can we change this in order to create a more sustainable model for the future?
I see. When I was doing research for your company, I noticed something that's really interesting, something I've never seen before. Nobody else is doing that. So Ledger Ellis recently signed a memo with Papua New Guinea. And before we talk a little bit more about that, I want to ask a question to the audience. Does anybody, raise your hand if you know where Papua New Guinea is? It's a country. Oh, wow, you guys are so knowledgeable. What? Okay, so I didn't know where it was, so I looked it up online. It's a country. It's right under the equator, I believe. It's next to Indonesia. It's on the east side of Indonesia.
Yes.
Yes, it's a little bit north to Australia. So I just looked it up and I was like, where is that? Anyhow, so your company signed a memo with the government of Papua New Guinea, and you guys are going to start building a special economic zone together, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we're really excited. So we've actually gone a step further than the MOU, and we have an executive decision to administer the zone. And so what happened is we have an island, and all current regulations are suspended, and they're giving us a complete blank slate to create the policies. And where we're starting is with initial coin offerings, because we think that that's a big issue in the space, but it's going to ultimately broaden out from there. So we're working. The government's very excited about bringing in innovation and kind of being a thought leader in this space. So we're working alongside them to establish this location right now.
So how would you define it? Is it like a regulatory sandbox? Is it like a social experiment? Because when people say blockchain is going to build a new world, they meant it figuratively, but you guys are literally building a new world.
Yeah. So we're so excited about it, and it's very much you can think of it as a regulatory sandbox, and we want to try to bring in other countries, figure out what the best processes are, and then kind of export the model outward. And I apologize, what was the second part of your question?
The question is, how would you define it? Is it like a social experiment, economic experiment?
Yeah, it's very much a legislative sandbox. That's kind of the direction we're going, and we want to do it in a way where we're constantly iterating on the policies. We don't want to be restrictive and say this is what you can do and what you can't do. We want to work with the community to formalize and then export the policies from there.
Oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, let us know how that goes. I'm going to move to Roy. So, Roy, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Ultra Sales Cloud? What is it? What's the problem that you're trying to solve?
Right. So basically, as I said, Ultra Sales Cloud, the name kind of indicated something about marketing, right?
Right.
So basically, we're trying to build the next intelligent marketing with a blockchain. So what's the problem? The industry obviously been around for years, and technically, the number one problem that would be a kind of tricky question because we would think there are actually three problems. Number one is data fraud, and basically the ad result are not true. Number two would be malicious ads. And number three would be irrelevant ads. So the first problem is the one we're trying to tackle first, and that's particular bad in Asia. And let us put it this way. So basically, the whole internet traffic is controlled by a large company, right? In the US, that would be Google, Facebook, and Amazon. And in China, that would be BAT. It's kind of exactly match with Google and Amazon and Total. That's the new ad news platform. And in the US, I think the top three control about 65% of the whole internet traffic.
Wow.
And in China, it's about 55%. So the landscape are very similar. And with that given said, with that kind of monopoly, the whole ad industry, what we call, it's called a walled garden. Meaning when the advertiser trying to send something in, technically their only power is give you the money, give you the ad budget. And once it go from there, it enter into a black box. It's completely, basically they have no control for anything, which means they don't know the result is true or not.
That's true.
So if with a very conservative number in China, at least 50% of the ad results are actually incorrect. So basically falsified. So that's the number one problem we're trying to solve because obviously the very nature for blockchain is trying to build a consensus effectively, efficiently, in a very large amount and verified node. So that's what we do, and that's basically what a Salescloud about. And obviously, when we get to in that cycle, and when we reach the second phase, we're trying to tackle the irrelevant ads. Basically, we're trying to make you only see the ads you want to see. And so that's basic where we are.
Specifically, can you tell us a little bit more about how Ultra Sales Cloud solve the problem of false, malicious online advertisement? Like how does it work in some in simple words? How does it work?
Absolutely. So first, I kind of apologize for the long name, and we're Ultra Sales Cloud token, so we're short for UST.
UST,
so
that's much better.
Make a little catchy to remember.
Yeah.
And so basically, what we do is let's talk about incorrect ad results, right? And we all know the main reason for that is a monopoly in the industry. So basically, the actual customer have no control of the results. So what they need to do is basically we'll have a D app. We can directly reach the user, that's like you and me, which can read the ads every day. And obviously, we're not going to sample every single one of them. And mathematically, you only need to pick 1 out of 10,000. And from that model, you actually already have a pretty good sense how how true the results are. But we don't really stop there. So kind of like that's our main thing is more like our version of DPoS, which means obviously we're going to have a super node. And those super node are represented by independent third-party enterprise auditing company. So basically, they're a big data solution company. They're trying to tell the advertiser if the ad results are true or not. And obviously, their vote gonna count more, just like a judge in American Idol. Forgive me for knowing so little about pop culture, but but anyway, the point is obviously with the two-layer voting system, and we can pretty much have the offline consensus about how true the ad results are. And obviously, all those information will be hashed and stored on blockchain, and which means that from very day one, and every ad campaign results will be on the blockchain, can be verified later. Obviously, we're still trying to work out exactly the access level because you don't really want everyone to see it. But at least we should be a federalized model, meaning all the advertiser and most of the important node should able to see that kind of data, because obvious data anomaly and data privacy is definitely one challenge we have to solve. So that's a basic how we roughly gonna solve this. So in a nutshell, basically we put the result on blockchain, verifiable by all, and also can be used by all.
I see. So in a few words, what do you think the crypto landscape is going to look like 3 years from today, specifically for the advertising or digital marketing perspective?
That's a great question. As a matter of fact, before I start this, I spent several years in venture world. And if we have a crystal ball now, what's going to happen in 3 years, and everyone's going to get rich. But I just going to offer my 2 cents. And I would think, we would think, Bitcoin, possible Ethereum, and will be around for at least several years. But they would have very little real world real usage, as we can see since 2009. So mainly controlled by TPS and also security and other usage issues. So they're going to be treated as gold, essentially. And obviously in the next few years, if not quantum computer going to come around and crack the whole POW algorithm. But on the other hand, if we truly believe, and we believe we all are since we talk about the real world adoption, if we truly believe blockchain, the only way for blockchain to go into mainstream is for that to impact every single person's life. That means each major industry, payment, advertising, e-commerce, should have a usage token, which is going to be a lot usable than a Bitcoin. And the competition is going to be really, fierce. And each industry, obviously, each industry is huge. Going to only have probably 1 or 2 winners at the end. And I would believe the one can win at the end. Obviously, they should have a pretty strong technology advantage. But I do think a strategy, execution, and also how you make the existing industry player to support you, that's actually more important. So that's what I think what the crypto landscape, especially in a more traditional industry, kind of looks like in a couple of years.
Thank you. Now we're going to move to Andrew. Andrew, you look familiar from the last panel.
Yes.
So now I get to ask all the questions. Are you ready for the questions?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So you've been a crypto investor for a long time, since 2013, right?
Yeah.
So that's 5 years ago, but I feel like in the world of blockchain, 5 years is like forever ago. So, 5 years ago, 2013, people knew very little about blockchain. It's not like today, it is now, it's not like, it's before everybody and their grandma are talking about blockchain during Thanksgiving dinner. So, back then there was very little players in the field. How did you make your decisions when you were trying to decide whom you're going to invest and who you were going to let go?
Yeah, so I had an incredible learning experience when I was only 19, way back in 2009. When I made my first startup, which was an enterprise chat software, like very similar to Slack. That was acquired by P&G when I was a freshman in college. And, I believed in the product, but I didn't think Slack would get so big 3 years later. So I took an early exit, and basically the thing I learned from that was just timing is literally everything in tech. It's not something, it's literally everything. Like, it will make or break you completely. So I was always thinking about what's the next big thing and literally searching it in Google, like as naive as it sounds, like what's the next big thing, literally. And so in 2013, everyone around me, all my peers, were trying to make unicorn startups and raise VC and be a Thiel fellow and go to YC and all that. No one was really paying attention to Bitcoin, but I was an iPhone app developer. I made a bunch of iPhone apps in my free time, and I just thought that if there's a small chance that Bitcoin could have a real use case one day, it doesn't right now, but if it does one day, even a tiny little fraction of a use case, it would definitely go to the moon.
Yes.
So it sure didn't feel that way. Like, I started buying it from $700 all the way down. But I just looked at it as if there was a use case one day, something could happen, right? And so that's how I felt about Ethereum, and still how I feel about some of the emerging projects now.
So did you hold?
No.
You did?
I sold. No. It was too painful. But now we're seeing, these ICO companies have multi-billion-dollar valuations in a span of 2-3 months of work. So if you didn't make your fortunes then, it's very easy to now.
Yeah. So in a few words, you're an investor. I suppose blockchain projects come to you all the time. They try to pitch their ideas to you. So what's the trend now?
It's actually the opposite. I'm trying to meet as many people to send me as many projects as possible so I can know if I don't miss anything. What's the trend? It's really, there's no secret. It's just how do we find adoption of blockchain tech in the real world? Is it a dApp? Is it a protocol? Is it a platform? Is it a decentralized exchange? There are all these different theses floating around there, right, that just could possibly get mainstream adoption. And a lot of people have different theses. I personally have a lot of conviction in developer tools. So I think that with mobile apps, the killer disruptive feature was having a mobile phone in your pocket. But with blockchain, it's actually trust. It's like a feature that no one can see. So I'm really, really excited about developer tools as my primary investing thesis. And yeah, it's just the same idea that I had back in 2013. If Ethereum or one of these projects become part of a developer stack for dApps, what would the price look like? And it would definitely be higher than what it is now. So that's why, I'm optimistic.
Sounds good. All right, then I'm going to move to Wes and ask you a couple of questions.
Yep.
First is, can you tell us a little bit more about Theta Labs? Because my understanding is what you're doing is when you have spare bandwidth on your own computer, you can share it with other people, and then you can get paid by doing that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. What we're doing is essentially leveraging all the unused bandwidth that every consumer or enterprise device has, whether it's phone, PC, tablet, whatever. Giving people the tools so they can share video streams with other users on the Theta network and earn Theta tokens as an incentive for doing so. So not building a new video platform per se, what we're building is infrastructure tools for platforms to build on us. Whether it's an existing platform like Samsung VR, who we're prototyping with, or the next generation of decentralized video platforms that some of which we're going to be building on top of Theta. We're just trying to give video platforms the tools to lower their costs by sharing on this peer-to-peer network, to increase user retention by creating this token economy, and on the user side, allowing them to get something out of contributing to this ecosystem as well.
So how do the best companies in the industry now try to solve this problem without blockchain? Or is it not solvable without blockchain?
There are some startups that are trying a similar peer-to-peer mesh network video streaming protocol like this. It's mostly the business model that they're having trouble with, because the way they're doing is essentially coming up with protocols which are effective. Like the Theta protocol, they can offload potentially 40, even as high as 80% of bandwidth from a platform under the right circumstances. But they're going to these platforms and asking them to sign a licensing agreement, and then the platforms just push it onto their users and say, you're sharing your bandwidth now and we're going to benefit from it, and thank you very much. Which you can imagine isn't very popular. It's a little bit like putting Monero mining software on someone's computer. So what we're doing is changing the business model where the video platform goes to the users and says, contribute to us and lower our costs and increase user retention, and in return, you get to share in the value you're creating too. So we're tokenizing that value of that bandwidth and then allowing platforms to cut it up and allocate it in different ways, whatever's suitable to their business model.
Thank you. The next couple of questions are for everyone. The first one is, we all heard the saying, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. For a long time, I feel like there is this trend where people think that blockchain is the magical element and you can just add it to any industry and it just turns so much better, 1,000 times better. But that's probably not true. So my question is, what are some of the common characters for an industry where blockchain adoption is not only doable, but also very necessary? What do you think?
So I think there's two sides to it. On the consumer facing, I think these tokens really only make sense where you need to realign the incentives of the community, like you're talking about how there's not a business model that helps and incentivizes people to participate in that network. If you could tokenize that in some way for their uses, then they have a reason to participate. So on the consumer side, I think it's where you align the incentives of the community. On the enterprise side, it has to be faster, cheaper, better, safer, and it's really hard to do that right now. And the second part of that is, it's not like SaaS software traditionally where you sell to company A and they get the full benefit, and you sell to company B and they get the full benefit, and you sell to company C and they get the full benefit. In things like healthcare and finance, you generally have to have an industry-wide implementation. So as we talk about applications in the real world, I think that even if you're doing something within healthcare and your ultimate target market is, healthcare providers in the United States, I think it makes a lot of sense to start in emerging markets where that infrastructure doesn't already exist and where there's a stronger need for adopting the type of technology that you're doing. So those are a few uses for it, I think.
Anyone else?
Right. I mean, obviously, I'm from a tech major, and my appetite for technology may be stronger than average. But I do think we don't, as human beings, we don't really stop at a hot bottle. We just barely make it by. If it doesn't, if it still works, why fix it? Exactly
Yes.
same thing for advertising, TV, newspaper. Things exist for 1,000 years. And 25 years ago, and Yahoo decided, why don't we make a digital marketing industry? And here we are. And we have Facebook, we have Baidu, we have Twitter, we have Google, and that's a billion-dollar company, and they change humans' history in a way, right? So having said that, I do think that there's still some industry has a better, probably a stronger incentive to adopt a blockchain.
For example?
And number one would be, I think if there's a big fraud, there's a large fraud in the industry without the proper counter measurement and counter power to limit those. Number two is if that industry has a really strong centralized server, because obviously when you have blockchain as a decentralized solution, it does providing security, flexibility, extensibility, all the good things that come with it. So that's the 2 point I would think industry has those two characteristics should have a better adoption and faster adoption rate.
Does anybody want to add?
In a nutshell, blockchain doesn't make everything better. It does, it's not like the antidote, throw blockchain and make it, no. I think that it's a hard question to answer, but in a nutshell, I would say there are three things that we need: scalability, usability for developers, and use cases. And all three of these things we don't have clarity yet in the industry, and that's why so many teams are tackling it, right? And there's so much attention in the space.
So what do you think is the biggest problem in blockchain industry right now? Because I feel like people keep talking about, adoption, but it's still not happening right now. What do you think what's the thing that's blocking it? Maybe is it infrastructure that's not ready, or what do you think it is?
There's probably a lot of things you can point to, infrastructure being one of them, but the biggest one that stands out to me is just user experience, because especially in a consumer-facing project, you are never going to convince mainstream users to jump through the hoops it takes to acquire crypto, to use it safely, to deal with custody issues. It's not going to happen until the product that you're putting out there is at least as easy to use as the status quo. So like in the case of our protocol, if a platform's trying to build on it and you need to go buy cryptocurrency to use it, and then there's a chance you have it lost by sending it to the platform, and then to redeem it you need to go to an exchange to sell it, it's just too complicated compared to what people already have. So we think if there's any chance of adoption, we have to abstract away as many of those barriers, those frictions in the user experience, so that it can feel a little more like what they're used to today.
When I was interviewing some companies in the past, many companies actually mentioned that they were trying to hide the blockchain technology behind it, so that when their users use their stuff, they won't even notice that blockchain is what's behind it. Do you guys agree with it, or what do you think?
Yeah, I have no idea how HTTP works, but I don't need to use the internet.
Yeah, I think initially all these companies were blockchain companies, right? I'm a blockchain company doing healthcare, I'm a blockchain company doing settlements, whatever it may be. And then it doesn't matter. It truly does not matter. It's just, you're not a blockchain company, you're a company that's leveraging the blockchain. It's a part of your stack. And I think that it makes it a lot easier to sell to institutions.
Yeah, I agree. Because I feel like a while ago we would refer back to companies like Google, Yahoo, like internet company Google, internet company Yahoo, internet company Facebook. But now they're just companies. Like, you would get weirded out if somebody say internet company Facebook. You're like, is there another Facebook that we don't know? So you're saying that in the future blockchain is going to be probably so popular that people just don't put the word blockchain in front of the word company.
Yeah, it's just a part of your stack. It's a part of your solution.
It's just how you solve the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, via blockchain. I see. So how do you get your customers? Because these are customer-facing products. How do you get your customers? Because it's not like we have a blockchain version of Google Play or of Apple Store. So how do you get your voices out there? By building communities, or how do you do it?
Right. I mean, obviously, as of now, community is one of the foremost approach. But I do think later on there has to be a sort of a more enterprise type of thing. So when we talk about, I mean, right now, obviously, you can put your the app in the app store, right?
Yes.
But I do think later on there's probably going to be a better marketplace, a better exchange way to push the app to users. I mean, for us particularly, obviously, we already have reach for the user, but I do think, user retention is also one of the challenges we're going to face, right? We don't want to switch platform and lose half our users. And so I do think there's going to be something like that kind of a decentralized marketplace and future for everyone push out their apps.
What about you guys?
Yeah, at our current stage, I mean, while consumers are end users of the video platforms we want to build on Theta, I mean, the reality is we're looking for platforms to build on top of the Theta protocol. So it's not so much a Google Store or the Apple Store that we're looking. It's building relationships with existing players in the video industry and incubating future platforms that are building on it. So funding developers, providing technical expertise to those who want to build the dApps on top of the Theta protocol.
I think that this is speaking a little bit more generally, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see these initial coin offerings moving back to the growth stages of companies. Because what you can then do is, if a company, say Uber's expanding into 12 different new territories, and they launch their token at the point that they're expanding, they're changing user acquisition costs into user acquisition revenue. Now you're buying the token that you're going to be using on the platform. They can see where their demand is, incentivize people to join. I think a good example of that is something like Golem. When Golem was one of the early initial coin offering companies to launch, everyone was really excited about renting out their computing power. And so I think that we can start to use these initial coin offerings as a way to incentivize adoption and not just selling to everyday investors.
I see. My last question is, it's going to be a little bit controversial, but everybody knows last year, especially starting from last fall, I believe, that the price of major cryptocurrencies just started skyrocketing. And that's when we had our first Blockchain Connect conference, and it was jammed. But 6 months now, a lot of things has changed. Especially the prices. It's been quite a roller coaster. So does that affect you guys in any way? I'm not going to ask how about your own personal portfolio, because that's probably painful to even think about it. But in terms of, you're all entrepreneurs in blockchain industry. So how does that affect your work? Is it too painful to even
No, just
talk
holding.
about? Okay.
Yeah, it'll bounce back.
I think there's a misalignment of incentives, right? You have these companies that have really long-term visions, and then you have investors that are really short holding periods. And so that creates a massive gap between the speculative value of the token and the fundamental value of the company. And so I think that those that are just kind of getting in and getting out are going to be really hurt. But like you're saying, just hold. If you believe in the projects that you're investing in, they're not going to be successful within the first 6 months. It's going to take 4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah, but I think he didn't hold, right, Andrew?
Well, he sold his Bitcoin, but I think with the other companies,
You hold other stuff, okay.
A bunch of other tokens now.
Okay,
Right.
good.
Well, I think there's two aspects of this. For one, for the if you talk about blockchain adoption, that's actually still have a long way to go. Right
Yeah.
now, we barely started.
Yeah.
So if you look at long term, that's obviously positive, right? If you truly believer for the cryptocurrency. Number two is I do think from an investor perspective, you have to put things in perspective. So let me put some number. Last year, January 1st, Ethereum is $8. And this year, the highest is about $1,500. Right now, it dropped back to $500. But how much it grew from $8 to $500?
A lot.
So yeah, of course, if you have a $200, 200% growth per year, 200 times growth, 200 times growth in a year. If you don't see some correction, I don't really think mathematics gonna work. And same thing for Bitcoin, which is existed for years. And January 1st of last year, the cost is about $1,600. And at the peak of end of last year, that's about 21,000. So that's 18 times a year. So right now we still look at 6,000. And so how much it grow from 1,600 to 4,000? And I'm sure there's an investor, on the back seat or whatever. If you have a 4-time exit in a year, I still think that's a pretty good year. So
I think that's pretty darn good.
You should really look at things from perspective when we talk about the long-term, short-term, holding game or waiting game.
Yeah.
What about you, Wes?
Yeah, if we mean adoption by, to mean usage of protocols, of usage of dApps, I think it's got very, very little correlation with the daily price of BTC. So if you're an investor, and especially a short-term one, maybe that's a concern. But I think for the majority of projects out there, it doesn't really make that much of a difference in the long term. They're looking at 2, 3, 5-year timelines. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. All right, guys, I think this is all the time we've got. I would love to ask more questions. Unfortunately, yeah, that's the end. Thank you so much for a great discussion. You guys have been great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.